Hello, today we will be continuing our discussion of the chondrichthyes with a discussion of the modern Elasmobranchs. So where are we? Well, we're in the superclass chondrichthyes. These are our cartilaginous fishes. We're looking at the class Elasmobranchii. So Elasmobranchs, these are our sharks and the rays and their relatives. We've looked at some of these infraclasses already. We looked at the Cladosalachamorpha and the infraclass Xenaacanthomorpha in the previous lecture. Those are both extinct. These make up our cladodonts. And then we started looking at the infraclass Euselachii, U being true. These are our true sharks. We discussed the hibidont division. These are the extinct sharks that we looked at in the previous lecture. And now we're going to be looking at the Neoselachii. These are the new sharks. Within that Neoselachii, we'll be talking about our modern Elasmobranchs. We can break these into three major groups. We have our galeomorph sharks, our squalomorph sharks, and our Batoidea. The Batoidea are the skates and the rays. When we look at the Elasmobranchs, we're in that infraclass Euselachii, right? Our modern ones are in the true sharks, and they first appear in the late Permian or early Triassic. Now, this isn't the Elasmobranchs in general, right? The Elasmobranchs, as we know from previous discussions, actually originated back here in the Silurian Devonian. But our modern lineages, they first appear here around that Permian Triassic time. And we have about 950 living species that make up our modern Elasmobranchs. So our modern Elasmobranchs, we can see them here. This kind of is a picture graph of our major groups of our living chondrichthyes. So we have chondrichthyes here, right? We branch off into our two major groups, the holocephali. Those are the chimeras, right? Chimeras, ratfishes. We've already talked about those, the whole-headed fishes. And we have our holocephali. And then our other major group are the Elasmobranchs. So these, as we can tell from the pictures, are our various sharks. And we get into our rays and skates and their relatives. So the Elasmobranchs here, we can break into our three groups. We have our galeomorphs, which is this group of sharks up here. We have our squalomorphs, which is this group of sharks down here. And then at the bottom, we have our Batoideae, which are our rays and skates and the relatives. Before we get into a discussion of the characteristics of our three major groups, we'll kind of work through an overview of the groups of sharks that belong to each of the major groups and just give you some idea of the diversity of the sharks that we're looking at. So starting with the galeomorph sharks. So the first group we'll talk about briefly are the heterodontiformes, the bullhead sharks. They're located here at the bottom. Bullhead sharks are a group of small sharks, small for a shark, 5.5 feet, which still sounds like a pretty big shark to me, but small for a shark. They're bottom feeders found in the tropical and subtropical waters. They first appear in the fossil record back in the early Jurassic, before what we get our other galeomorphs. So they're probably actually much older than the other galeomorphs and probably earlier than suggested from their fossil record. But they've never really been common throughout the whole time of the sharks. And currently we just have 9 living species, but they have distinctive small spikes anterior to their dorsal fins. So that lets us identify those sharks fairly well. We have our next group of sharks is the Erectolabiformes. These are the carpet sharks you can see here. They're also called the wobbegong sharks. That's because quite often they have a pattern on them that resembles a carpet. So you can think of the whale sharkies in this group. It may be one you're more familiar with, one of our large sharks that kind of has that darker color with the white speckles on it. The nurse sharks are also found in here, about 43 or so species currently living. Their dorsal fins are spineless. They have a small mouth. You can even see it here in the picture. It usually doesn't go past the eyes. Many of them actually have barbels as well, and we find them worldwide distribution in our tropical and temperate waters. They're usually found in fairly deep water. Our next group is the Carchareniformes. These guys up here at the top, they're the ground sharks. It starts to look more like a common shark, what we think of when we think of a shark. These include our blue sharks, cat sharks, sandbar sharks, lots of other ones. A lot of these will have the nictitating membrane that comes off that protects the eye. We'll look at that in detail in a little bit, a few more slides. We have the 2 dorsal fins and the anal fin, the 5 gill slits. We've got about 8 families in here, over 270 species. It's not considered to be monophyletic, so they're actually doing a lot of revision with this group, trying to figure out exactly how all of those species are related to each other. Our next group of fishes, of sharks in this group are the lamniformes. This is our last group here. They are the mackerel sharks. These include some of our well-known sharks like our great white shark. It also includes things like the goblin shark and the megamouth shark. So we've got a lot of variety in the different shapes. If you're not familiar with what those sharks all look like, we've got some pictures coming up to help us. Again, with the 2 dorsals and the anal fin, the 5 gill slits, no nictitating membrane in this group. And now we definitely have that mouth extending back behind the eyes. We've got 7 families in here with about 16 living species. Our other major group of our elasmobranchs, of our sharks, is the squalomorphs. And the squalomorphs, we actually break into squalomorphs, and then one group comes out as a squatinomorph. We're not sure where that last group is in terms of the phylogeny, so currently it's looked at as a separate group. So our first group here are the hexantiiformes. See him here on the top, the cow sharks. They're also known as the 6-gilled sharks or the 7-gilled sharks. They're considered the most primitive of the squaliforme sharks. We have 7 living species. We just have that 1 dorsal fin set well back, 6 to 7 gills, no nictitating membrane. The frilled sharks are also in this group, and the cow sharks. We'll look at some pictures of those a little bit later. Our next group here are the echinoRhinoformes. These are the bramble sharks. We don't have very many of these, just 2 species, but they're kind of big, 3 to 4 meters, maybe 10 to 13 feet long. They have a short nose. You see there on the shark, right? Not as much of a nose. And rough thorn-like denticles. So in some cases, those denticles, right, the little that make up the shark make it feel rough. Some are fused together and give it kind of this rough feeling. No anal fin, and those dorsal fins, we have 2 of them now, and they're set way back on the shark. Our next group of our squalomorphs are the squaliformes. These are ones you're probably familiar with. If not yet, you'll see them in lab. These are our dogfish sharks. We have 7 families, over 120 species. We've got 2 dorsal fins now, and they do have the spines. No anal fin with this group, no nictitating membranes, 5 gill slits, as we see in many of our sharks. The squaliformes is a really diverse group. There's a lot of variety in the size and the shape of the sharks. They are found worldwide, everything from polar regions to tropical, everything from open ocean to shallow coastal areas. They include the dogfish sharks, like I said, as well as the gulper sharks, sleeper sharks, among other groups. And our last group to talk about in here are the Christophoriformes. These are our saw sharks. So saw sharks are kind of distinct. There's only 9 species. Most are found in the Indian Ocean area down to the South Pacific. They are found at depth 40 meters to maybe 100 meters deep. They have these 2 long barbels. You can even see them on the little cartoon picture here that come off to the side. And their teeth are of different lengths, so they're not all the same size tooth. We do see 2 dorsal fins there, but no anal fin. 5 to 6 gill slits. They can be up to 5 feet long. That long snout is covered with an ampullae, and that with the barbels lets them detect prey on the sea floor. And they can ambush the prey and then swipe it with the saw to disable it and then be able to eat it. So realize that this is a saw shark. We'll look at saw fish a little bit later. They're actually a kind of ray. And then our last group here are the squatinomorph order. There's the squatiniformes. So these are considered to be a separate order currently from the squalomorphs. These are our angel sharks. You can see one here, and you can see immediately that it looks a little different from the other sharks. We currently have 1 genus and about 21 species. The anterior portion, the front part of the shark, is flattened, so it looks more like a ray. But the posterior, the end part here, is still shark-like. It's got that shark-like body and tail. It does have 5 gill slits, and these are on the back, so on the top part of it. No anal fin. And what's interesting on this, you can't tell from this picture, is that the caudal fin, right, the tail fin is actually larger on the lower lobe than the top, which, just looking at the cartoon pictures, these drawings here, you can see most of these other sharks, their tail definitely has that larger upper lobe like we see in most sharks. These, they can be up to 5 feet long, up to 2 meters, so 5 to 6 feet. They'll bury themselves in the mud, and then they'll attack with their protrusible jaw. And note that their fins, while they look like they're attached to the head, they're not. So they're not like a ray that way. They're actually a shark. But these are the rays. Our last major group of the Elasmobranchs is our Batoideae. So we're just, again, working through the diversity here, and then we'll look at each group in detail. So we'll start by looking at the Christophoriformes. These are the sawfishes. You can see them here. The sawfishes and the rhinobatiformes, the guitarfishes, are kind of lumped together, and it's unclear whether they're separate orders or the same order. So we'll kind of discuss them as if they're together here. The sawfishes specifically, they can be quite big. They can be 7 meters or more, 23 to 25 feet. The mouth and gills now are oriented like a ray. That means that the mouth and gills are going to be on the bottom side. And note we don't have the barbels there either, but we do in both of these have that elongate, typical ray shape where we've got those pectoral fins that are quite long. And note how they are attached to the head in this case. So that's the Pristiformes and the Rhinobatiformes. We kind of lump those two together here. The Rajiformes, these are our skates. So you can see here, this is a typical skate. In there, the skates, we have a lot of species here, 200 or so maybe, 4 families. And again, we're found pretty much everywhere, polar to tropical regions, deep water to freshwater even. Lots of variety in our size and shapes of these, but we generally have that kind of ray-like shape. Again, flattened dorsoventrally with our spiracle and eyes on the top, and on the bottom is our mouth and our gill slits. The next group of those skates and rays are the Torpediniformes. These are here, there are electric rays, so they're able to generate that electricity. We know that when they swim, remember when we talked about the different kinds of locomotion, they're not going to so much flap their pectoral as use their tail to move them forward. Their pectoral surface is covered with those different receptors and electrogenerating organs. So the torpedo rays, the electric rays, they can generate anywhere from 8 to 220 volts. We've got 4 families, close to 70 species. And according to Google, which always is right on things, the ancient Greeks would actually use them as a kind of anesthetic for operations and to help numb the pain of childbirth, which is kind of interesting as they did it. Instead of an epidural, you get a torpedo ray. I don't know which one I would prefer. Let's see, back to our rays. The last group we have are the Myliobatiformes down here at the bottom. So the Myliobatiformes are the rays, and they are actually separate from the Rajiformes. So they derive their shape independently. They're not directly related. It's not like we kind of had one and then had the other. They're considered to be completely independent groups. The Myliobatiformes have 10 families, about 220 species. Most of these are going to be in the tropical to subtropical waters, but in there, they're kind of all over. Some are found in deeper waters. Some are even found in fresh water. Most are demersal, so they're somewhat related to the bottom, right? They're kind of a bottom feeder, but some are not, like the eagle rays. They're pelagic and they're widespread. So hopefully that gives you some idea of the diversity of the groups that we're looking at. Now we'll look at them in detail kind of for characteristics of the overall group. So we'll go back to the galeomorphs. That's our first group of the sharks that we talked about. Most of these are found in shallow water, and they're considered to be your classical sharks. So sometimes they're referred to as the requiem sharks. They will all have those 5 gill openings. You can see those even on the pictures here. They all have the anal fin as well. And they all share similar cranial skeletal structures. So in this case, we're talking about the subocular shelf that's in there. And now I've thrown in some pictures just to show you some of the variety of the fishes that are out there. We've got the spotted wobbegong here. We've got the nurse shark. You can see even with the little barbels. And then the goblin shark, kind of one of our deep sea specialists for the sharks. But realize that all of these galeomorphs, the ones here, the ones on the previous slide, the ones on the list, they all share certain characteristics in common, right? We said the 5 gill slits. We said most have the anal fin. They also have a similar pectoral fin structure. And most of these sharks have a greatly reduced spiracle. In addition, these galeomorphs generally have 2 dorsal fins. There's only one order that has dorsal fin spines on it, and that's our Heterodontiformes. Those are those bullhead sharks. And only one order with nictitating membranes. Those are the Carchariniformes, which is one of our larger groups. And they have that transparent, translucent eye there. You can see where it's kind of closing up here. You can see where it's kind of hidden here as an extra eyelid. And the thought is it helps protect the eye and maybe helps retain vision of some sort. So again, this we see in our ground sharks. And then just to show some variety here, we have the thresher shark with that really elongate tail there. We can use that as actually a hunting mechanism. They'll circle schools of fish and then use the tail to stun them and then come back and eat the fish that are stunned. And then a variety of size. You see the horn shark here next to the diver to give you an idea of how small it is. And then the basking shark, which I don't have a picture with a person, but this is one of the giant sharks. It's our second largest fish. And you can see here its mouth is open. It's filter feeding. It eats similar way of the other large aquatic animals that we're familiar with, the whales. So now we'll turn our discussion to the squalomorph orders. Now we see a little variety. We'll have 5 to 7 gill slits. Remember, we have those cow sharks here, and they have 6 or 7 gills depending on the shark. Many of them do not have the anal fin anymore, as we can see here on our spiny dogfish. And they're also going to share some of the same cranial structures. In this case, we don't have the suborbital shelf, as we saw. We had that shelf in the galeomorphs. But some variety here. Here's the frilled shark. They're linked there with the cow sharks. You can see it has kind of a different body shape for a shark than what we're used to. We talked about the spiny dogfish shark here. He's got those spines in front of both of those dorsal fins on his back. And then the saw shark. We're going to look at him in just a little detail so we can make sure we know a saw shark from a saw fish. So a saw shark is obviously a shark because of its gill location, right? Sharks have their gills along the side of their head. And you can see even in this picture, right? You see those gills there? They're on the side, where a ray would have the gills underneath. The mouth here is underneath, that's fine. But we've got the gills on the side. And then there's two other characters. One is that the teeth along the saw are uneven. You can see we have tall teeth, and then next to it there, you can see there's a short tooth and then another tall tooth. We see that arrangement, but then also those distinct barbels that are there are found on saw sharks, but not on saw fish. Continuing with the squalomorphs, again, we see similar pectoral fin structure within the squalomorph order, as we saw within the galeomorph order. And many of them have spines associated with their dorsal fins. We mentioned it with the spiny dogfish. We see those on that. You can see here there's our saw shark again with those uneven teeth and the barbels so that we know who he is. And then over here we have the cookie cutter shark, and we'll just talk about him for a minute. I think I mentioned him earlier when we were talking about feeding, and he may come back again when we talk about behavior. But he's kind of a unique shark. He's one of the few parasitic shark species we have. And you can see from that mouth, it's kind of specialized. He'll live in the deep sea. He is at depth and does have the ability to phosphoresce, and whether he's pulling in, using that as a lure to kind of pull in a larger fish, or whether he's doing that to blend in is unsure. But he kind of hangs out, and when a large fish comes by, or even a mammal, we see evidence of them feeding on seals, it will come over and latch on with its mouth and basically take out a little cookie cutter circle, a bite from the animal, and that's how it eats. So it's kind of a different kind of a shark. We don't think of them as being that kind of an ambush predator, that kind of a parasite, but it works for the cookie cutter shark. We find sharks in all sorts of places. Now we're going to switch from the squalomorphs to just briefly talk about the squatinomorph, right? So this one is our different guy. This is our angel shark, and we're not entirely sure where it belongs. We do have those 5 lateral gill slits. So again, the gills are going to be up on the surface where you'd expect them to be on a shark, not a ray. And it swims with a shark-like movement using its whole body, not flapping those fins. Hypocercal tail, again, that's kind of different for what we see. You can kind of see it here, right, where that lower lobe is larger. No anal fin on the bottom. And those enlarged pectoral fins that we see here, they're not fused, right? You can see the line that separates them in both cases. So they're acting as a fin, just a really big fin, where in a skate or a ray, those are fused, right? It's one whole part. So they're kind of a unique type of shark. And then briefly to look at the relative diversity we have in the shark orders. What we see is when we look at the squalomorphs, so we'll throw the squatinomorphs that way. We have the hexanthioformes, our cow sharks and our frill sharks, and we don't have very many of those. Lots of the dogfish sharks, big diversity there. We have our pristiniformes, our saw sharks, not a lot. Angel sharks as well. So that's about a quarter, maybe just over a quarter we consider to be squalomorphs. And then on the rest of it here, these are going to be our galeomorph sharks. So we have our bullhead sharks, we have our carpet sharks, we have a few of our lamniformes here, our mackerel sharks, but most of them are those ground sharks, those requiem sharks, the carcharodontiformes, making up most of it. So when we think about the sharks, we have to think in general of their major characteristics, right? We have our galeomorphs, which we tend to think of as more as maybe a classic shark. The greatest diversity of the sharks, right? You'd have to say it's close to 70–75% of the sharks here. And they have those main characteristics, right? We have our 5 gill openings. We have an anal fin. We have that suborbital shelf, reduced spiracle, generally have 2 dorsal fins, and we have that similar pectoral fin structure that we share within the group of galeomorphs. As opposed to the squalomorphs up here, they're about a quarter of the sharks, right? Generally deep water. Their main characteristics, now instead of just 5 gill slits, we'll have 5 to 7. Many of them have lost the anal fin. That suborbital shelf has also been lost. We have no suborbital shelf in any of the squalomorphs. And they also, within the group, share that similar pectoral fin structure. Quite often we have spines in the dorsal fins, right? The angel shark, he's kind of by himself here. 2 spineless dorsal fins, no anal fin, 5 lateral gills, a large spiracle, and that hypocercal tail makes the angel shark kind of have its own unique characters. You should have a general idea of the characters that belong to each group so that if you saw a shark, you could kind of figure out where it belongs. From the sharks, we'll now move into our third group, the Batoideae. These are our batoid fishes, our skates, and our rays. They have that depressiform body shape. You can look at one, except for those angel sharks, but now you should be able to tell the difference. You should be able to look at the fish and know what you're looking at. Those dorsal ventrally flattened fishes, those skates and rays, have that same body shape. Enlarged pectorals that fuse to the head now, right? Where that angel shark had the separation, we don't see that. And we have those 5 ventral gill slits on the bottom. So we also have, when we look at the top, right, we have a dorsal spiracle here. We have our eyes that are dorsal as well, and we don't have any sort of anal fin when we look at the bottom of the shark, the fish. This shows you some of the variation of how they look, right? We've got the cow nose right here. You can tell he's got kind of looks like a little cow face. Those eyes up on the top, the mouth and the nose, the gills on the bottom part. On the top of the fish, again, is where the spiracle is, so they can lay on the bottom, draw water through their spiracle, and not have to worry about sand and things in their gills. This also shows us the saw fish from the bottom. So now it's a saw fish, not a saw shark. And you can see those gill slits right on the bottom, like we see in all of our rays and skates, as well as that saw apparatus that comes out. The teeth are all the same size, and there are no barbels. So that's how we can tell the difference between the two. No barbels. Teeth are all the same size, gills on the bottom. We're dealing with a ray. That's the sawfish. Some more general characteristics for the batoid fishes. The suprascapula are fused dorsally with the vertebral column. Remember when we looked at the bone structure, the pelvic and pectoral girdles, how that they're arranged differently in the skates and rays. The first vertebrae in this case is going to be a full centrum. Their teeth are distinct. They're pavement-like teeth. Most of them are eating hard, crunchy things, so they have very strong teeth that are able to grind up that food. About 12 families, give or take 800 species. And this, again, is to show you some diversity. We've got the Brazilian guitar fish here. You can see those fins are fused with the head, showing that we are a ray. We've got the eyes and the spiracle on the top, the gills underneath, again, showing us that we're a batoid, and then an elongate body in the back. The spiny butterfly ray here as well. What it will do is it will go out in the water on the bottom, and it will bury itself in the sand and wait. If you find one and you can tell it's there, divers can come up and gently fan away the sand. That's how this picture was taken. And if you don't threaten it, the ray will remain right there. So talking about skates just for a minute, 2 major groups of skates and rays. Skates are mostly oviparous, so they'll lay eggs in cases like this. If you walk the beach, you may find them. Mermaids' purses is what they're often referred to as. Skates are mostly found in temperate areas. They don't have a spine, right? They lack any sort of spiny barb on their tail. And they'll undulate their pectorals when they swim, so it kind of makes like a sideways S. So they don't flap them, they kind of rotate the edges. And here we have a brief video that shows a swimming skate. I'll let it run a little bit longer. As it moves around, you'll actually be able to see the underside of the skate a bit, and then you can see the gills and the mouth structure there. Okay, so we saw the skate swim with kind of that undulating side, right? It makes kind of that S shape as it uses its pectoral fins. It's not really flapping up and down. It's kind of undulating them as it moves along. And I hope on the underside you saw the mouth and there's kind of the close-up to let you see the gill slits there as well. Now we'll switch from skates to rays briefly here. Rays are mostly viviparous, so most will give live birth. You can see here's a small version of the southern stingray in the bottom. And they usually have a barbed spine, and maybe 1 or 2 spines. When the mother gives birth, she's giving live birth, the barbed spine is quite often in a sheath to avoid injury, and then once the young is born, then it's free. Most of our rays are going to be tropical, and when they swim, they're going to flap their pectorals, but it's going to be a little bit differently, so we don't see that S undulation quite as strongly in a ray. We'll see that here briefly. Much more of a wider flapping motion rather than that undulation we saw. And in both, as we saw in the skate, the ray also keeps that tail nice and straight behind it. We don't see that moving much to help it swim. Diversity of rays, we do have to look at that here a little bit. So our temperate rays, we tend to have lots of the ragidaes, the skates, and then we have some sawfishes, as well as some of the electric rays. As we move into the tropical areas, we see much more of the stingrays here and the guitar fishes as well. So it's about 40% skates and 40% rays, with then our guitar fishes at about 15 and our sawfishes at about 5. So pretty good makeup of diversity there for our skates and rays. This was our brief overview of our modern elasmobranchs. We try to highlight the major groups of the galeomorph sharks, the squalomorph sharks, as well as the Batoideae. Hopefully now you know some representatives of those groups, as well as the general characteristics for those. As always, as you're reviewing today's information, if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.